And I'm Scott Warner. I'm president of the Culinary Historians of Chicago, and I work closely with Kathy. We're like Siamese twins, and she has her Chicago Foodways Roundtable. I've got Culinary Historians of Chicago, and so you get a full buffet of things from both of us. Anyway, our guest tonight is Viola Buitoni. Yes, that's the same name as the pasta because Viola is the sixth generation of an Italian family that made food history. In the late 1800s, her ancestors became Italy's first culinary entrepreneurs to mechanize the making and distributing of pasta. She's pasta royalty. In 1907, her great-grandfather invested in a small confectionery shop, which became Perugina Chocolates. Quite a heritage for Viola. The Buitoni and Perugina brands have belonged to Nestle since 1989, but Viola has remained true to her heritage and her parents, who ate from their garden in the Umbrian countryside and took her and her four siblings on seasonal expeditions foraging for chestnuts, wild asparagus, and blackberries. Excuse me, I just get all choked up when I read about her background. But Viola is a chef, instructor, and food writer, and was born in Rome and raised in Perugia, the capital of the Umbria region of Italy. After moving to the US to attend New York University, Viola started Buitoni and Goretti, a catering kitchen and Italian fine food shop in New York City. She later moved to San Francisco, where she began lecturing and teaching Italian food tradition workshops at the San Francisco Italian Cultural Institute and Italian Consulate. Viola teaches Italian cooking remotely, and she also leads immersive food tours off the beaten path in Italy. In 2020, the president of the Italian Republic honored her with the title Cavaliere dell'Ordine della Stella d'Italia for her work furthering the culture and business of Italian food. Viola lives in San Francisco's Mission District with her husband, son, and tiny dog. She is coming to Chicago to teach a class at Italy, downtown, E-A-T-A-L-Y. I'm going to ask you in a second. Well, Viola, has there been any more information about when the class is going to be? I couldn't find it listed yet on their website.
Hi, so the class is going to be on the 11th. As far as I know, they put it on the website today. I sent approval last night, so it should have been put on the website today.
Well, so if anybody's interested, go to the Italy website, E-A-T-A-L-Y, and look up their cooking classes. And you are here to talk about a lot of wonderful things. I didn't mention about your book, I don't think, in this introduction. That's rather important. She has written a landmark book, which is getting rave reviews. Ruth Reichel said that the famous food critic, has said it's a book you can't be without. And Viola is going to talk about what's in the book and all kinds of other things. So first off, could you tell us about your book?
Yes, so my book was, okay. First of all, Scott, I should say that I am super thrilled to speak in front of this group. First of all, because you give me a lot of time to speak, and I love that. It's not just like a 20-minute kind of, condensation of all these beautiful books that I wrote, and that has so many things that I like to talk about. So I will tell you about my book. It's a book about Italian cooking, of course, but it's a book that is organized by ingredient. Indeed, it is called Italy by Ingredient. It is a message, it is a concept I have been kind of swirling around my head for quite some time. I would say probably at least 6-7 years. I refined it during a brainstorm session with a good friend, and we came up with this idea that Italy by ingredient, the ingredients of Italy, and how I kind of organize my cooking around these ingredients was really what defined me. Hence the title. I've taught classes about Italy called Italy by Ingredient, and then finally a little over 2 years ago, I found my agent said, "Okay, you really need to put this proposal together. You can't just say that you will. You just have to." So I did. Rizzoli loved it, and they published it. So here we are. The book came out actually a month ago today. It came out exactly a month ago.
By the way, do
So
you have a copy of the book with you by
I
any?
do. It's right here with me. I'm going to show you. This is
Speak of
the
the
cover
devil.
of it.
Oh, hold it up a little bit higher. Yeah,
Yes.
that it looks like great ingredients.
Yeah, this is the cover, and the ingredients go all the way to the back. So the cover is like, it's a wraparound cover. And there's even a little bit of gold here. So I put this book together, which I really very deeply love. And the ingredients that I chose were ingredients that are mostly pantry ingredients with a few fresh ones in. But the way that I chose them was really kind of very simple. I lay down on the floor of my pantry and I looked up in my shelves. I live in a loft, so I have pretty high ceilings. And each side of my pantry, which is a kind of a narrow hallway, has about 6 shelves. So I'm looking up and I'm trying to see what takes up a lot of space. And then I also want to see not just what takes a lot of space, but what are the corner of my pantry that I look for, that I reach for quite a bit. So for example, capers and olives, they don't really take up a lot of space. They're maybe a third of a shelf, but it's a third of a shelf that I dive into all the time. So of course, those made it in. And then there is balsamic vinegar, and then there's all the cereal section. And then of course, it's like almost 3 shelves of pasta. But then I'm thinking and I'm telling myself, yes, pasta is great. But could it be just pasta in one chapter? And the answer is no. Pasta is too big. So the next book will be probably Italy by pasta. So wait for that one. But until then, I gathered these 12 ingredients, which I divided in 5 sections. And I can go ahead and talk about the 5 sections, Scott, unless you have other ideas.
Yeah, briefly, if you can tell about the 5 sections.
Yeah, so the 5 sections are 5 sections start with condiments, and by condiments I mean the things that you use to dress other things like pasta, for example. So I start or cheese or meat, and so I start with balsamic vinegar. And after balsamic vinegar, I talk about conserved tomatoes, and finally I talk about capers and olives. Then I move on to cereals, and I have decided to pick polenta, rice, and farro. Then cheeses, I have a fresh cheese and an aged cheese chapter. The aged cheeses are obviously Parmigiano and Pecorino, and the fresh cheese are mozzarella, ricotta, and burrata. Then I move on to meat, salumi, but I talk about salumi not as something that you put in a sandwich, but something that you use to build the flavor of your dishes. And last but not least, I go to fish. I left it for last, but this is really my favorite section of the book. And there are, of course, anchovies, which we'll talk about. And then there is bottarga, which we'll also talk about. And last but not least, it's salt cod. Little known fact, Italy is the 3rd largest consumer of salt cod in the world, just after Brazil and Portugal. So it is a very important ingredient of the Italian pantry, even though we don't make it in Italy, we import it, but still it's a pretty huge part of the Italian diet. So that is how I organized it. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, now you go ahead and let us
go ahead.
lay out your buffet before us of all you
right.
have to say.
Okay, so we talked about how I chose the ingredients and how they came to be. These ingredients, why these ingredients? Because they are ingredients that, in my opinion, I think in everybody's opinion, make home cooking easier rather than more difficult. I have been teaching home cooks for about 15 years. And my mission has always been to make sure that people cook at home as much as possible, that they get familiar with ingredients, that they learn how to shop well and to shop wisely and to shop quality, to shop on a budget. And then they go to the kitchen and they just use them like joyfully and playfully in a way that kind of brings people together. Food is a great aggregator. It is very easy to be around someone who cooks. People tend to just really let their guard down around cooks and around the kitchen. I always read when I read magazine. I always read this advice that tells hosts and hostesses to have things that should be ready when the guest comes in, or they can just be in the oven, so they can spend all their time with the guests. And my thing is like, just have the guests in the kitchen, right? I mean, you can just spend time together in the kitchen. And so these ingredients, to me, are ingredients that can be brought together with the bounty that we have all around us. So yes, we have to look for, but there is wonderful agricultural product all around us, and make a very tasty, flavorful, and easy way of cooking. Because if I want people to cook at home, and then all I tell them is that they should be making fresh pasta and 4 hours things and cakes and decorate, and then what I'm telling them is that cooking at home is a project, right? It's a lifestyle that you choose. And I don't think of cooking as a lifestyle. I think of cooking as life. We all have to eat. There are things that you can do without. You don't have to go skiing. You don't have to ride a bike. You don't even have to read, though you should, but you have to eat. Otherwise you die. So since you have to do it, you might as well do it well, and do it with joy, and do it in a way that is easy and that also works with the way that we live life today. So I have a very active life. Of course, I cook a lot. Of course, I love to go shopping, to go shopping, to go and look for my ingredients. But I also like to do other things, including hanging out with my friends, for example, or going to the opera, or traveling. So I want food and good cooking to be a part of my life, but I don't want it to be my whole life. So when I wrote this book, that's exactly what I had in mind. Someone who has a life that is full and busy, and still wants to have tasty and easy to make food. I wanted to talk a little bit more about how I came to cooking. And I would like, if you'll indulge me, to read you the introduction to this book, which tells you a little bit of who I am, aside from the whole family thing, which is, amusing, but that's not all I am. So I'll go ahead and read the introduction. And what I say is, my name is Viola Buitoni, and I thank you for choosing to cook with me. Before you even ask, yes, just like the pasta, I am the 6th generation of an Italian family that made food history. But alas, my siblings and I, all born in Rome and reared in the Umbrian countryside, were destined to be the last generation of the family's entrepreneurial history. The Buitoni and Perugina brands have belonged to Nestle since 1989. But I am also the daughter of food-loving parents who believed raising your own food was a better way of eating. I was weaned on extra virgin olive oil and parmigiano, and I first spooned ricotta into my mouth straight out of the warmth way in which the local shepherd had just cooked it. I played hide and seeks in the room where pancetta and prosciutto hung to cure. And at the end of adult dinner parties, I emptied wine leftovers into vinegar barrels I could barely reach. Our home was a 15th century former convent surrounded by an olive grove. Produce on the table came from a vegetable garden, chickens and fresh eggs from the coop. In November, we picked olives. In January, a team of Norcini, the legendary tour masters of Umbria, spent a week at our place slaughtering and butchering our pigs and curing the meat. Seasonal foraging expeditions were the norm. My siblings and I knew that yellow leaves meant we'd soon be digging mushrooms and shaking chestnut branches, the violets and wild asparagus signal disters, and that after a summer storm, we'd collect snail, and blackberry picking meant that the start of school was just around the corner. Our lives moved to the clock of food. Whatever didn't come from our land, my parents carefully purveyed from selected food artisans all over the country. Our trips were always dotted with stops to acquire hyper-local ingredients that could not be found outside their area of production. So I had this life in which all these wonderful ingredients were just part of the background. They were there. I really took them for granted. And then my father moved to the States because he was working with the company. It was still the family at the time. So he moves to the States, and I finished high school, and he said to me, "Do you want to move here?" My older siblings had declined to move to the States with him. And so I said, why not? I'll give it a try. And I got to New York, and I was like 19 years old, going almost 20, but yeah, close to 20. I get out of the plane, and the moment I stepped, like even on the tarmac, because I remember it was an airplane that we went into the bus, and then they took us to the terminal. I just had this sense of excitement. I thought this was like the most amazing place I'd ever been in my whole life. And I remember having this thought that was, as I was crossing the bridge to go into Manhattan, thinking, no one is ever going to take me away from here. I mean, somebody did eventually, we'll get to that later. So I got to New York, and I was, as I said, super excited. And I wanted to keep that excitement. I wanted to love New York, and I did. But I was really missing the food. I was really missing these flavors that were just, they were just such an important part of who I was, of my heart, of the way that I like to eat. I wasn't really, I've never liked fast food, and I just wasn't interested in anything that was not really good food. So these things that I had always taken for granted, in my life, I would just open the pantry door or the refrigerator, and there they were. All of a sudden became a little more difficult to find. And with some research, I realized that there were some things that I could find, right? I could get the ricotta. I don't know if any of you remembers the famed Balducci's in New York. They used to be on 6th Avenue at the corner of 10th Street. It was incredible. So the first time I entered Balducci, my life was like, oh yeah, I can live here now. I know that I can live in New York. Like I already thought I could before, now I'm sure. And then my father took me to all the various little Italis in the Bronx and in Brooklyn. And so I found that with some searching, I could definitely get those ingredients. But the even bigger surprise to me was that if I looked even a little bit further, I could actually also find wonderful fresh ingredients. I discovered when I was still a student, I studied at NYU, I discovered the Union Square Green Street Market, the Union Square Green Market. And I was enamored. And then I realized that while the pantry was really kind of my heart and what I needed to call any place a home, the fresh ingredients are really what grounded me to the place, because the fresh ingredients were the ones that were typical of that place and nowhere else. And so I started going to the farmer's market, and they had, incredible, it was winter. So it was a lot of broccoli and onion, but also a lot of vegetables that came from other food cultures, which I had really never seen. And so then people said, oh, you should go to Chinatown. And so I started exploring and finding all these great ingredients that I found I could cross with my heart, with my pantry, and come up with like really delicious, wonderful dishes. So what had been just a given in my life all of a sudden became what I like I facetiously called a blood sport. So when my friends would go skiing or to the beach over the weekend, I would go and chase down the ingredients that I wanted in my pantry. Little by little, I found them all. There's no Italian ingredient I cannot find in New York, in the States at this point. Many of them by now are available just in supermarkets. I mean, you can get a good parmigiano at Costco. You can get mozzarella anywhere. Obviously, the quality can change, but you can find buffalo mozzarella burrata even at a Safeway or just a run-of-the-mill supermarket. Some cities like your own, like Chicago, are lucky enough to have an Italy among their stores, and so you can really seriously find a level of quality of all these ingredients I talk about, which is sometimes hard to find even in Italy itself. So things have changed since I first started doing my hunt for good ingredients. But in the meantime, I had enough time of hunting the good ingredients and really kind of making a passion out of something that had been the given of my life, that I actually made this passion my work. So I got out of school, and I had a good friend who had another good friend who was opening a restaurant, and I was absolutely clueless as to what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, as many of us are when they get out of college. And so my friend said, why don't you try the restaurant to just for the summer while you figure things out? Well, I figured out that what I wanted to do was being in a restaurant. This was back in 1989, and we are in 2023, and I am still working in food. So from that restaurant, I spent about a year and some there, and then in some other restaurants. I worked the front of the house, the back of the house. I worked in hotels as well as a freestanding restaurant, and then eventually I opened my own catering business with a friend in New York. While the business was happening, I also happened to fall in love with a man who's now my husband, who lived in San Francisco. So after 5 years of back and forth, he was the one force who was able to tear me away from New York and into San Francisco, which is where I now live. In San Francisco, I had a baby, and at some point after the baby was old enough to be able to go to socialized care, I started teaching. I thought that would be a good way for me to re-engage with the world of food and with my work, without having to sacrifice weekends and evenings and holidays. During these many years of teaching, every class I've always given, there was someone who asked, do you have a book yet? Where can I buy your book? So eventually Italy by Ingredient happened. I would like to spend some time talking about the ingredients that are in here. So let's start with balsamic vinegar, because that's the one, it is the first ingredient in the book, because that's actually the ingredient that I always get the most questions about, because it's an ingredient that is probably the simplest ingredient in the book, but it is also the most misunderstood. Why do I say that it's the simplest ingredient in the book? Because traditional balsamic vinegar is made with one thing, cooked grape must. There is absolutely nothing else but cooked grape must being the first phase of the pressing of the grapes before making wine, that is cooked to a point where it is reduced by about 30 to 40%, but it's not stable yet. Because it's not stable, it can undergo a series of acidification that changes it little by little and turns it into we know as traditional balsamic vinegar. To get traditional balsamic vinegar the way it's supposed to happen, it takes at least 12 years. And up to 25. So you understand that this justifies the reason why balsamic vinegar can be so expensive. Having a balsamic vinegar, vinegary or acetaia as we call it, means that you have a large space, which is at the attic, the higher place of your house, where you have a series of batteries where you put the grape must after it's been around and changing for about 4 or 5 years. You start putting it in a series of decreasing barrels from the top to the bottom. And then every year, once a year, you take the second to smallest and top up the smallest one, and so on and so forth until you get to the largest one, which gets topped up from the bigger barrels of the vinegar in not the vinegar, but the must that it's becoming vinegar. And eventually you get enough, you get to something through a combination of different factors, you get to the 12 years where you have the vinegar the way that it's supposed to be. So every step of this process is regulated by a very strict protocol. And what is regulated is what kind of grapes can be used and where the grapes come from, right? So you can use, say, Lambrusco. That's like the one that is easy for everyone to know. Lambrusco grape is grown in different regions of Italy. The one that is used for traditional balsamic vinegar can only be grown in the region of production, which is Modena or Reggio Emilia. Lambrusco that is grown anywhere else can be used for other vinegars, but not for traditional balsamic vinegar. The wood that makes the barrels in which the vinegar spends its life can only be, it's about 5 or 6 types of wood. That includes chestnut and juniper and linden, if I'm not mistaken, but it's about 5 or 6. the vinegar where it's made needs to be open. There needs to be wind going in a certain direction from one window to the next. The process benefits from the changing weather patterns to the light, the changing light during the day. Now, after all this has taken place, and the vinegar maker says this thing, they said, okay, I think this is ready. It takes it, it puts it in big barrels that go to a facility who doesn't know where this vinegar came from. So there's an independent panel of judges that taste it and says, okay, this is good, this is great. You can actually call it balsamic vinegar. Or they say, no, this isn't good enough, cannot be called balsamic vinegar, goes back to the vinegar maker and it has to continue its aging. Once that's happened and the judge of panel put their seal on the vinegar, then the vinegar goes and gets bottled in a central plant in a facility, which gives each bottle a number and a seal. And from there, then it goes back to the vinegar maker, who cannot do anything at this point, because if the seal, if it's in any way broken, then the vinegar cannot be sold. So this is a kind of vinegar where a small 100 milliliter bottles, because they can all be sold in 100 milliliter bottles, will cost anywhere from $80 to $300. Now this is, as I said, a very complicated process that we hear about starting in the year 1006. We hear about an amazing vinegar that is happening in the region of Emilia-Romagna. Then in 1747, we finally hear the word balsamic as it refers to vinegar. But for many centuries, it still remains for just in aristocratic families, for the production and use of the upper class families. At some point, people catch wind of it. People are beginning to get richer in the rest of Italy. And so people want to buy this very selected vinegar. And so at this point, there's no protocol on the production, no one that says yes or no in how it's supposed to be produced. And of course, this opens the door to fraud and to lucre. Hence, all the balsamic vinegars that you see today all over the world, right? Because how many times do you go anywhere and there are vinegars that, like you said, oh, balsamic vinegar, and it's like $3. You understand that something that is $3 cannot be what I just described. So what makes the difference? How do we know we are getting a good vinegar? How do we know our money's worth? There are two things that we look at. One is protocol, so production, and the other one is origin. The production is what I just described to you, and it can be summarized in the word traditional. So the word traditional is key. If it says traditional balsamic vinegar, or in Italian aceto balsamico tradizionale, then you know you're getting the real thing, because the word balsamic and vinegar in themselves can be referred to a ton of things. And in fact, there is a decree by the European Union that says they cannot be in any way possessed by anyone. They cannot be owned by anyone. So, but if the word traditional is in front of this traditional balsamic vinegar, then we have something that this group of people can claim, and they say, yes, it is traditional balsamic vinegar, is made in this way and in no other way, and no one else can use those three words together. The second part is the origin. So traditional balsamic vinegar can only be made in Reggio Emilia and in Modena. That is it. So if you see traditional balsamic vinegar di Torino, it's fake. It cannot be the real thing. So this happened because these very careful and good producers at some point found themselves deluged in very low quality things. And so they kind of took up arms and they say, hold on a second, we need to defend ourselves. So they defend themselves through consortia that make sure that the names and the brands of quality are not used by anyone else but the group of producer, and also by having third party evaluating their products and making sure that the products are what they're supposed to be. There is another type of vinegar which has origin because it comes from Modena, but it doesn't have the production process. And that's called aceto balsamico di Modena. And it's essentially a market's response to the demand for this beautiful product. And it's a product that places himself somewhere between the sharpness of a red wine vinegar and the sweet acidity of a balsamic vinegar, traditional balsamic vinegar. The price for that is generally can be from like, anywhere from like $7-8 all the way up to 40-50. A good one will be around 20. This is the kind of balsamic vinegar that you can use to dress salad, and you can use to cook meat, to deglaze. The other balsamic vinegar, traditional one, is not just an ingredient, it's an experience, it's a sensation, it's something that kind of like takes you over, and you put it in your mouth, and what you get is what I call a round acidity. And what I mean by that is there are two types of acidity, right? There's the acidity where you have a spoonful of red wine vinegar, and your nose is going to go like this, and it's going to go like up and down. It's like a zigzag, right? If you have a little spoon of traditional balsamic vinegar, you still taste the acid, but instead of going down in your throat and up in your nose, it's going to go all the way around and kind of close back into your nape. And that's why I call it round, because it really kind of surrounds your all sensorial things up here. So the reason why I'm telling you this whole story is because I want to make sure that if you see a vinegar that is like $80, $90, $100, and you say, oh, I should buy this because, it's a great balsamic vinegar. Make sure that you see the word traditional, that you have the branding, that you have the numbering of the bottle, and that you have a bottle that looks either like a pot-bellied flask or an upside-down tulip. Those are the only two types of traditional balsamic vinegars that are worth your money. Anything else, I'm not saying it's not worth your money. It's just a different product. It's a product that, as I said, you can use in the kitchen. In my book, I think there are about 6 recipes for the with balsamic vinegar, and there's a couple that are with the aceto balsamico di Modena. So they are the ones that I cook with, but the others are just something where I bring in the balsamic, traditional balsamic, as an additional layer of flavor. So, for example, there is a cocktail with balsamic vinegar. There is a, let me pick up the book. So there's a cocktail with balsamic vinegar. There is some roasted pears that are drizzled with balsamic vinegar, a risotto with bone marrow that is finished with balsamic vinegar. Some pasta with ricotta that is finished with balsamic vinegar. So it's really kind of a finishing thing. But then there is also a liver that is deglazed with the balsamic vinegar of Modena. And there is also dessert that is made with a reduction of the balsamic vinegar, not the traditional one, but the other one. I should take questions about balsamic vinegar before we forget, if anyone has some.
Well, actually, the question was if you could go to your pantry and show us a bottle with the seal and the number. But I pointed out you're not exactly at home.
I'm not at home. I'm in Seattle because I'm doing a bunch of events here. But I can show it to you on my book right here. Let me see. This one, you see it? So you see the number right here. The seal is broken because, my friends and I are drinking it. So it's broken. But that's what the bottle is going to look like. The name that you see here, that's the producer, but that is the last label that goes in. When the vinegar is being evaluated and then bottled, there is nothing that tells the bottlers and the evaluators who the producer is, because obviously that avoids any kind of favoritism, right? So the code that identifies the vinegar is only known by a part of the people who are in this process, so that they can get it back to the right producer. Okay, so then the next chapter is about tomatoes, conserved tomatoes. So tomatoes are a big thing in Italian cooking. They are not the only thing. I will tell you this little anecdote that one of the first classes, cooking classes that I gave, someone looked at my display and they said, how can this be an Italian cooking classes? There is no garlic and there are no tomatoes. And I said, thank you. That is very kind of you. Indeed, Italian cooking has a lot of tomatoes and a little bit of garlic, but it's not all about tomatoes. I find myself more often than not, when I look at my table, there is no tomato anywhere, right? There's no tomato sauce, there is no tomato soup. Yet tomatoes are definitely a big part of Italian cooking. So over the summer, we eat a ton of tomatoes. And then when they are at peak season, we conserve them in very many ways. The simpler one, of course, being this, which is just peeled tomatoes conserved in juice. And the book actually does have the technique, which was my nanny's technique for conserving tomatoes. And then we have a number of other ways of conserving them. So there is what we call a passata, which is a tomato that has been milled and boiled down. There is something we call polpa, which means pulp, which is super popular in Italy because it's a little bit like peeled tomatoes, but it cooks much faster because it's been drained and it's already chopped for you. And then we also have tomatoes that are conserved in water, some that are conserved in juice, big tomatoes, small tomatoes. And then finally, all the way to something we call estratto, which is there is a tomato paste and then there's an estratto. The tomato paste is already pretty thick. And then the estratto is super thick and probably like somewhere even darker than Scott's shirt, so kind of like a dark maroon, and it is one of those flavors that is really an underlying thing. So you put a little bit in your cooking, and you are going to be eating it, and you're going to be saying, "Oh my God, this is amazing! What is it? What determines this incredible flavor?" You don't know what it is. You just know that it makes your food better. And I love them all. I always have them all in my pantry. You know, the passata, there is a soup in this book, which is one of the recipes that everybody's talking about and loves, which is made with passata. It's a very simple soup. You just boil down some leeks and carrots, and then you add the passata. There's some ginger in it and a little bit of orange peel and orange juice. And then you cook it for maybe about 20 minutes and then mill it. Super simple to do, and passata is great for it because it's already being cooked for you, so you don't have to worry about the tanginess of the tomato. It's already quite sweet, and makes for a really easy way to cook on a weeknight. Then I also love all the specialty little tomatoes that are coming in now. You can see if you're in Chicago, so you have Italy, you're very lucky. You see all the little tomatoes that are packed in water. So cherry tomatoes of different kinds of different areas in Italy. And those are the ones that you kind of save for special occasions. They are the kind that, you know, you put on a frying pan with a little oil for like 2 seconds and they're ready. And then last but not least, there is the paste. So the paste is great because, as I said, it brings this dimension of cooking, of flavor without a lot of effort. And that is what I use for my ragu bolognese. There is no peeled tomato, just a couple of tablespoons of tomato paste in my ragu bolognese, which is actually also in the book. Capers and olives. I talked about capers and olives and it being one of the corners of my pantry that I reach for all the time. There are different kinds of olives, you know, green and black. And, you know, I think cooking with them depends on what you're making, but also on your taste. Generally, some are fleshier and a little sweeter. Some are very tangy and they're harder. I tend to cook more with black olives than green. But for example, I love green olives with lamb because lamb is kind of like lamb it's got that sweet, gamey flavor going to it that I think it's cut a little bit by green olives. And capers come in either brine or they come in salt. I usually choose the ones with salt. That's what I tend to cook with, because brine is a very strong flavor. I mean, it's got vinegar in it. Not brine doesn't have vinegar in it, but the ones that are conserved in vinegar. Vinegar is a very strong flavor that's going to alter sensibly what you're doing with your food. Whereas the salt you can rinse off, and then you have the capers, which are beautiful and bright. Capers take up many different forms, not just the little round things that you see. Capers are the buds of the bush before it becomes a beautiful flower. The smaller and tighter the bud, and the more pressure the caper is. Sometimes you buy the capers and they're kind of bigger and they're beginning to open up and you see some little filaments coming out. They're perfectly fine, but those are the kinds that you want to just like chop up and toss in a sauce or in a salad. The little buds are the ones that you want. Sorry, there's a dog in the mix. The little ones are the ones that you use for on top of like a cocktail, and they're almost like a finishing thing. And then once they become really big, then there is a beautiful flower that comes out. Chefs in Italy have been using the flowers quite a bit. They're kind of sweet and they're beautiful. They smell a little bit like jasmine. And then the last part is what we know as caperberry. So the caperberry is, I love it in sandwiches. I really like it for cocktails. I love how tight it is. Like it's very fleshy and it's very, and kind of like you bite into it and it just kind of spritzes wonderfulness in your mouth. So the last one that has now become a pretty big ingredient in Italy are caper leaves. So caper leaves have been, caper leaves have been used in island cooking, especially Sicilian island cooking, for a long time. But they're now coming out of the islands and into the mainland, and we're using them in salads. We're using them in sauces. They're really quite good, and they are conserved the same way that capers are conserved. They're boiled first and then conserved in salt or in vinegar or in olive oil. And you can either get the super tender tiny leaves, or you can get ones that are shaped like a heart and are like almost this big. I love them in salad because they have the flavor of the capers, but they have the same texture of kale. So I think they will be one of the discoveries that you'll find in my book. Obviously, capers and olives are great with eggplant, and they're great with tomatoes, and they're great with fish and with chicken. And so you'll find all of that. Then I move on to the cereal section, and let's talk about this because it's very, very interesting. So when I told people, oh, I'm going to write about Italy by ingredient, everybody's like, oh, what are you going to say about pasta? And I thought about it and I said, nothing. Why am I going to say nothing about pasta? Because first of all, everybody's saying things about pasta, and I don't want to just be one of the voices of the choir, which is already a pretty busy and loud choir. Secondly, because pasta deserves much more than a chapter. You cannot exhaust the world of Italian pasta in a chapter. And I'm talking about dry pasta here, not even fresh pasta. And thirdly, because pasta, as you know, people think about, you know, Italians and fresh pasta. Yes, we do make fresh pasta, but fresh pasta is not an everyday cooking thing. So I decided to leave pasta out. Not to say that there's not a lot of pasta throughout the book. Actually, each chapter has at least 2 different pastas, but I don't focus on pasta. I just focus on pasta as a vehicle for the other staples, like for the ingredients. I think of it as a canvas that I can paint with all these other beautiful ingredients that I bring into my story. So instead of doing pasta, I went to rice, exploring all its possibility. You will find that you don't have to serve risotto. That is one of the big things, one of the big takeaways of this book. You can make a risotto without standing over the stove and stirring it all the time. But also you will find that rice in Italy has many uses. Rice is baked, rice is used in salad, is used in soups. And for the longest time, now we have about 100 and some types of rices in Italy. For the longest time, we had a generic rice, which was called riso nostrale, which means, you know, it means homegrown rice. And that's that's kind of what Italians ate up until the beginning of the 20th century. But then scientists and farmers became interested in all the other different types of rices, not just they were done not so much in Italy, but also in other parts of the world. So long rices came in, so what we call the indica rice, which is longer, and then and people started mixing our homegrown rice, and they came up with lots of different rices, including the kind that now we think of, we associate with Italian rice making. So the types being especially arborio and carnaroli, which are the two rices that are mostly used for risotto. So, but this wasn't risotto. Risotto, as it is known today, was actually not a thing until 1925, when someone decided that they were going to cross our homegrown rice with a variety from the United States called Lady Wright. And the advantage of Lady Wright that it was at a starch that was not very water soluble, as much as our homegrown rice was. So what happens with the starch is very water soluble is that you make your risotto and you get a soup because the starch is all coming out and it's no longer a cream. It's more of like, a breakfast cereal. If you have a starch that is less water soluble, you get what we like in risotto, what we call the al dente, right? So you get the outside cream, but with the nice firm kernel grain in the middle. And so that's how we think of risotto today, but really it's not something that has been in Italy forever. The traditional risotto used to be much, much mushier than it is today. So with time, Italians really diversify the rice production and the types of rice that are in Italy. And we started realizing that different applications require different rices. So there are rices that are better for salads, there are rices that are better for risotto, rices that are better for soup. In the States, what you find more easily, of course, are carnaroli and arborio, but also vialone nano. And sometimes a couple of other ones are now coming in, including an amazing black rice, which is a crossing between a basmati and a Venus, which is called Artemide, Artemide being Artemis, the goddess of wisdom, I think, right? Wisdom and hunting. And it has very intense, beautiful flavor and doesn't really need much of anything. And it is, again, a vessel for other very good food. I will show you the plate that I have here because this is one of my favorite pictures in the book. But this is the black rice that I'm talking about. And what I've done here, I've done nothing but boil it with a little bit of onion and some salt and pepper until it's kind of nice and al dente. And then I have put some shrimp on it, a little avocado and a little tarragon and some almonds. So it's a very simple recipe. And one of the reasons why I love this recipe is because while you're cooking this rice, your home really smells like home. All of a sudden, everything is warm. Everything smells like wood and love and togetherness. So I adore this rice as kind of like being one of the big discoveries of the last 5 years. And I am connecting more and more with the rice community in Italy, which is incredible. And in fact, because I don't know if you know, I don't think I've said this, but I do lead some food tours in Italy. In fact, Merle, who came to one of my tours, is here with us. And I'm actually working on putting together a rice tour because I am so fascinated by all the things that we do with rice in Italy. We are the biggest producer of rice in the European Union. And the majority of rice that we produce is actually used for sushi. I thought that was another very interesting thing for me. Then the other two elements that I chose in my cereal sections are polenta, of course, and last but not least, farro. Everybody, I think polenta is very popular in the States, but polenta, the way that we know today, is a relatively new thing because maize didn't come to Italy until well into the how can I say this? sorry, I can't think of the word, but it was something. It's an American crop that made it to Europe and in, I think, the 15th century, more or less, and it started really being grown in kind of like the hard areas of northeast Italy, like in the maybe 17th century, and because it was so resistant and so resilient to bad weather and mosquitoes and maladies, it became a very important source of sustenance for the farmer populations of that area. So polenta is now really a national dish, even though it finds its roots in the northeast area of Italy. And so every Italian cooks with polenta. There are different types of polenta. Polenta used to be made with anything, right? So I forgot to say this. So the polenta is seen as far as the Romans, but it wasn't necessarily done with corn because there was no corn. Polenta was just a ground mush of anything. So it could be legumes, it could be grains, it could be old bread. It was just a mixed mush that you put together. And then little by little, corn kind of like moved everything else out of the way. And when we think of polenta today, we think of polenta made with corn. So there is yellow polenta is the most common one, but there's also white polenta, which is made with white corn. There is a brownish polenta, which is made with a mix of corn and buckwheat. And then nowadays there are a lot of heirloom production of corn that are being brought back into the polenta production. So it's also a very wide world. I choose polenta based on, of course, on what I'm making, and also do I want to really taste the polenta? Am I doing something very simple where I'm just putting like butter and cheese on it? In that case, I want a polenta that has a very rich flavor. Or am I using, say, for fish, right? So if I'm putting some fish over polenta, maybe I want a polenta that's a little sweeter and less and comes less on my palate. Last one, kind of newish to the tables of the States, but very old in Italy, so old that it was actually found in Etruscan tombs, and the Etruscans were around long before the Romans, is farro. So there are 3 different types of grains that are commercialized as farro. Einkorn is what is called small farro piccolo. And then there is emmer, which is the farro medio, medium farro. And the large one is spelt. Also, farro can be either completely husked, partially husked, or left whole, in which case is whole, we call it whole grain, whole kernel. The one that you find most likely if you're buying farro that is not defined in any other way is 90% of the time is going to be an emmer wheat. There are productions in Italy, especially in Tuscany, that are considered particularly good. But the States, honestly, is really catching up. They're like catching on to the whole farro craze. And there are some really good grains that are being produced, some really good farro grains that are being produced in the United States. Farro is not gluten-free. A lot of people say, oh, I eat farro because I cannot eat gluten. Well, surprise, farro does have gluten, not as much as regular wheat, but it does have a percentage of gluten. Also, farro makes a really lovely flour, which has wonderful flavor, and it does have some gluten, so it's a little more forgiving than some of the flours that have, either no gluten or very low gluten level. And it can be used for salad, it can be used for soups, it can be used for stuffings, it can be cracked. There's a cracked farro recipe in the book that I use for a soup, but cracked farro is also a really great breakfast cereal. And farro has been around my life for a very long time, but I really didn't become aware of it until I found it it was served at my brother's wedding buffet. And there were a lot of tensions that were happening because, it was super hot. My parents were divorced by that time, and my father had invited his new belle. And so it was really not a very easy wedding. And then my brother and my sister-in-law decided that they were not assigning seats. So that made things even worse. And then all of a sudden, this soup comes out, this farro, and it's super hot, but it's like served kind of like tepid, and it's got all these thirst quenching vegetables and a fantastic olive oil. And all this calm, like this quiet. All of a sudden, everybody's good friends again, and we're all happy to be there. And that's kind of like the moment that farro crystallized in my pantry. And I was like, okay, I will always have farro from now on. And I do. In fact, I always have at least 2 or 3 different kinds of farro in my pantry. After that, after the cereal, we're moving to cheese. And let's talk about Parmigiano and Pecorino. 2 very different things, right? People say, can you use them interchangeably? Yes and no. You can, because they both have amazing flavor. And so let's say you're making a spaghetti al pomodoro. You know, you can put Parmigiano or you can put Pecorino, and they will be different, but both very good. But they are 2 different, profoundly different cheeses. First of all, the milk. Pecorino is made with all sheep milk. In fact, pecora means sheep, whereas Parmigiano is made with cow's milk. Pecorino really only takes about, about 60 days to become what is called pecorino. And then there's the more aged kind, but the basic pecorino is about 2-3 months, and it's ready. Parmigiano needs 12 months to be ready. The way in which they're made is different. We call Parmigiano a type of cheese that is defined as grana because the coagulate is kind of broken down into little grains that are the size of rice kernels. So in Italian, kernel, the name for kernels is grano, so hence grana. And that you recognize those types of cheeses because they are the cheeses that get kind of like these little crystal pieces, and they get a little crumbly in your mouth. Obviously, the older they are, the crumblier they become. Pecorino is not made like that. So pecorino are the curd. That's the word I was looking for. The curd is cut into much bigger pieces. There is lots of salt that's put inside. It's actually put in a brine of salt. So there is a lot more salt than there is in Parmigiano. Pecorino tends to be a much smaller wheel. A Parmigiano wheel is going to be an average of about 80 pounds. And as I said, it's kind of a little bit like the balsamic vinegar, where it has to go through all these different iterations of control, quality control. And it's not ready to be put on the market until A, it's 12 years old, and B, somebody from an outside certification organization says, yes, this can go on the market as Parmigiano Reggiano. So the pricing obviously is also different. And the regionality of it is also a little different, because pecorino is more in the kind of like the center south. There are a lot of pecorino that is used, whereas Parmigiano is used more in the north area of Italy. So from Emilia Romagna on up. And I am talking about traditionally, historically, because nowadays pecorino and Parmigiano you find throughout Italy, right? Parmigiano, if you think of Parmigiano, probably it is the national cheese. In fact, we use Parmigiano to cure babies. It's one of the weaning foods. My kid was weaned on Parmigiano and olive oil. Those were like some of his first foods. We give it to athletes. When you're sick, Parmigiano is considered to be like absolutely necessary for you to get better. The fresh cheeses that I took into consideration are mozzarella and ricotta, of course, that have been around for a while, and then kind of like a new kid on the block, which is burrata. Burrata is a cheese that has only been around also since the beginning of the 20th century. It's not, in my opinion, that constitutes tradition, but it is a recent tradition as compared to other, to say like the balsamic vinegar that has been around since the year 1006. So burrata came out of the ingenuity of 2 brothers who could not deliver their milk to the town because of bad weather. So they were left with all this milk, and this was down in Puglia, in the city of Andria. They were left with all this milk, and they said, okay, what are we going to do with it? So they came up with the idea of using a mozzarella skin to conserve the cream and the leftover mozzarella for a little while longer, until the bad weather ended. So the bad weather ended, and they had this new product that they had made. They brought it to the city, everybody loved it, and so they became a sensation. So where did they get the ideas? There are cheeses like that in other parts of Italy. that conserve butter inside. So it was kind of like an old way of conserving fresh butter inside an aged cheese. So you took like a cheese, like a scamorza, a cheese that was aged and it was made from pulled paste. And so they would tie it around butter, and that way they would keep the butter fresh. And so they riffed on that idea and they came up with the burrata. Now, burrata for the longest time was like a super local thing. When I was a little kid, you didn't find burrata anywhere unless someone brought it back for you, right? Someone went to Puglia and then brought it back for you. Now you can find it everywhere. Like any supermarket in Italy will have burrata. The production has gotten much bigger. And that is one of the things that Italians are really good with. So taking these really wonderful products that are made with years of like knowledge and wisdom, and realizing that they have commercial potential, and making the commercialization of these products big while still maintaining the quality. I mean, if you take Parmigiano, that's a great example, right? So of course there are Parmigiano that are made by someone who will make just like 100 wheels of Parmigiano a day, and they pet the cows every day and they eat all the best things, and so that Parmigiano is going to be amazing. But even the Parmigiano that you buy at Costco as a baseline, which is actually quite good. And that you find that in these products that I'm talking about, you find that over and over again. So the other two, mozzarella and ricotta, they've been around longer. Obviously, we get access to good Italian ricotta and mozzarella nowadays because we have better transportation, better refrigeration. So there are two types of mozzarella. We have the buffalo mozzarella and the fior di latte, which is made with cow's milk. I prefer the fior di latte. I know that the buffalo mozzarella is supposed to be the best of the best, but I actually like fior di latte better. And buffalo mozzarella is made mostly in Campania, but also in the southern part of Lazio. And that's considered to be the best of the best. Now, other people are trying to make buffalo mozzarella, and it's not that it's bad, but it's just not as good as the one that you get in Campania. What I love about buffalo mozzarella is that it's the epitome of a living, breathing food, right? Food is a becoming thing. Argos. So buffalo mozzarella, when you open it, it's got a little milky thing that tells you that there are still some little microbes at work. And when it first comes out of the factory, of the place where it's made, it's super milky and very sweet, and it's kind of like it's got a lot of bounciness to it. And then as the little animal inside it do their thing, the inside starts to get a little firmer, and it starts to get away from the skin, and you get this little bit of water around the skin, and the holes get a little tighter, and you get a little bit of a tang. It's still good. It's just becoming, right? So I always tell people, do not put mozzarella in the fridge, buffalo mozzarella, because if you put it in the fridge, you kill the little animals, and it doesn't happen. Buffalo mozzarella should be eaten pretty quickly, within like maybe 3-4 days from you buying it, but you should keep it on your counter in its own water. Buffalo mozzarella is always sold in its water. You've noticed that, right? It always comes with the liquid. Keep the liquid, put it in a bowl, and then just keep the mozzarella in it. The other one, the fior di latte. Fior di latte means flour of milk, which is the cow's milk. You can keep that in the refrigerator. Also, mozzarella should be eaten pretty quickly. If it's left over, unless it's like yellow and acid, don't get rid of it. Just put it on pizza, use it for filling. Put it over pasta, but don't get rid of it. You can do lots of things with it. Of course, as I said, it's like yellow and smelly, then you don't want it anymore. Ricotta is huge cooking ingredient in Italy, of course, especially in Sicilian cooking. We use it a lot for fillings. We use it for sweets quite a bit. That is, the ricotta chapter is the one chapter that has, I think, 3 different desserts in the whole book. You can put it on pasta. If you do make just a simple tomato pasta, instead of putting some Parmigiano in it, just try a spoonful of ricotta. Also, we eat ricotta with just olive oil, salt, and pepper. You can put some coffee powder in it and sugar. You can put cocoa in it, honey, jam. You can eat it with It's, you know, great with caviar. It's great with bottarga. It's great with conserved fish. You can really do so much with ricotta. What we find here in the States is generally cow's milk ricotta. In Italy, depending on where you are, it's either cow or sheep. So in Umbria, where I come from, sheep is more common because we have more sheep than cow. But you can also find a mixed ricotta or an all cow ricotta. Now I'm even seeing like buffalo ricotta and goat's ricotta. They're all quite good. I mean, it's difficult to say, oh, this is, you know, which one is the best one. I think it's a matter of taste. The Italian ricotta is a little different than American ricotta because Italian ricotta is technically not a cheese. In fact, the correspondent of the Italian FDA does not consider it a cheese. They call it a dairy adjacent product because you make ricotta from the whey. So once you've done the cheese production, you have the whey left over, you warm it up a little bit, and then the curd, the coagulate starts coming together. First, it makes little flakes, little bows, and then the little bows come together in a big mass. And that's when the cheesemaker comes in with a little basket and fills a little basket with the bows, with the little flakes, and leaves it to drain. And that's ricotta. And in fact, the words ricotta means cook twice, right? So the prefix ri, it's like it's an iteration, and cotto means cooked. So if you ever go to Italy and are near a ricotta making place, make sure that you stand by and you wait for some warm ricotta to come out of the cheesemaker hands, because it is an absolutely stunning experience. The next chapter, which is kind of very near and dear to my heart, is about salumi. And what I'm trying to show with this chapter is that you can eat salumi, but salumi is meat. So we want to be responsible about eating meat for a series of reasons. Salumi are very salty and they're, you know, not good for everybody's diet. But also we have to be responsible about eating meat from an environmental standpoint, especially when it comes to pork. So you can use salumi as builder of flavors. You don't have to eat, you know, a quarter pound of prosciutto. You can take a slice of prosciutto and use it to make your sauce, and it will bring a wonderful layer of flavor. And you will have eaten prosciutto and will have enjoyed its flavor without, you know, having to consume an amazing amount, a large amount. So I also love to use mortadella quite a bit. Mortadella is one of the secret weapons in the Italian cook's arsenal. Mortadella is full of flavors because it's made with all the leftover. After all the good parts are taken out, you take mortadella, you put a bunch of spices and a lot of salt, and then you mix it into this just incredible thing that has so much flavor. When we were little, my mother would say, oh, mortadella is terrible, it's made with donkey. Well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with donkey. And secondly, mozzarella is actually quite delicious, and it can be made rather responsibly and rather well. I also use speck. I like speck a lot. Speck, it's a smoked and cured ham. It comes from Tirolo, so the northeast part of Italy, and is one of the few Italian salumi that are smoked. We don't do a lot of smoking we actually do. Italians smoke a lot. They just don't smoke food, but so we don't smoke foods a whole lot. But speck is one of the things that is a good example of the light smoking that sometimes Italians use in food. Of course, pancetta and of course guanciale. We all know about those. Those bring amazing flavor with very little effort. And also what I like about those is that you can render the fat and then you can use that fat for cooking your dish. And in fact, that's what I do in the dishes where I use it. For example, if I can show you this one, this is a 1-pot pasta. And what I do here is I render the guanciale fat, and then I take out the little bits of guanciale that are crunchy. I use the fat to toast the pasta, and then I add some hot water and I cook it almost as if it were a risotto, just cook it until the water is absorbed, and then I toss in a bunch of cheese and the guanciale back in it. Takes about 5 minutes. and I call it the hungry child pasta because it takes about 5 minutes. And when my kid used to come back from school and would be famished before, I would hear him stomp him down the hallway, and I'd have the pasta going for him so that I would be sure that he would be fed adequately and well, and not go throughout my whole refrigerator eating things and just, in a disorderly way. And then we're moving to the fish. So let's talk about the fish. Let's talk about anchovies. I want to show you what is my favorite picture in the book. I actually wanted this picture to be the cover of the book, but my publisher did not oblige me on this one, but they did let me have the gold title. But here they are, anchovies. So the anchovies that I talk about in the book are conserved anchovies, of course, right? There are fresh anchovies, and that's hopefully going to be another book. But for the purpose of this book, we are talking about conserved anchovies. And I'm going to read you a little bit from the opening of the chapter, in which I say that every time I start talking about anchovies, my voice goes up to octaves. I blush and I boom my hands way more than the average Italian. These tiny fish have the might to make me lose composure, logic, and threads of thought. To spare the reader an incoherently shrill page, I called the most dedicated anchovy professional I know. His name is Giulio Giordano. He lives and works in the town of Cetara along the Amalfi Coast, and he's third generation of people who conserve anchovies. He fishes them himself with his brother and son, goes out on the in the Gulf and fishes them only in certain time of the year, and after that, so they are fished at night in the spring and summer, because in August, the school of anchovy go out to super deep waters, very rough waters for some R&R, by which I mean romancing and reproducing. And they stay away until the early spring. Early spring, they come back into the Gulf of Amalfi, and the whole cycle starts again. The Giulio's family has been doing this, as I said, for 3 generations. And after the fishes are caught, within a few hours of being caught, they're ready for the next step. So they're beheaded, they're gutted, and they are put in barrels with lots of salt, and in which they are left to mature, and they're left to mature for up to 6 months. And then there are 2 things that come out of it. One is the anchovy, and the other one is this little liquid that comes underneath that we call colatura, and it is the Italian fish sauce. And it is just absolutely just a bomb of beautiful flavor. The other thing that we make with anchovy is anchovy paste. Anchovy paste is made generally with, the kind of like the leftover from the working of anchovies. But there's nothing wrong with the leftover from the working of anchovies. It's quite good. And in fact, anchovy paste used to be a staple on my breakfast table growing up. My mother would give us bread with butter, anchovies, and then would give us a cup of caffè latte, and that was our breakfast. And to this day, I still love it. The next fish we're going to talk about is salt cod. I should say about salt cod, I do want to read a disclaimer to you that I want to preface this chapter by saying that while my love for salt cod is unabated, I've expanded my knowledge of it to understanding that the long history of salt cod as a food source and trade comes with some baggage of environmental and human exploitation. You can garner a full understanding of it from Mark Erlansi's fascinating 1997 book, Cod, a biography of the fish that changed the world. Today, when I buy and cook baccalà, I am mindful of the sustainability of its sources, and I hold its past role as a cheap staple to feed oppressed populations as a reminder that we all must continue to strive to bring equity into our food system. Cod. So Italy is 73rd in size among the countries when it comes to size, but when it comes to the length of our coastline, it jumps up to 14th, which is why fish eating is a religion in Italy. So you might wonder, why conserve fish? Well, conserved fish came in through trade via Venice, and I mean salt cod. And little by little, it made its way down the rest of the peninsula. Nowadays, there are as many recipes for salt cod as there are families, as there are moms who love to cook, dads who love to cook, as there are small towns and cities. And it is I wouldn't say that salt cod is cheap. It's actually quite expensive, but from a pound of salt cod, you can easily feed like 8 people, because once you desalt it and let it plump up, you get a lot of fish. The best place to get salt cod are Portuguese stores. My favorite source is a place called Buy Portuguese Food. And last but not least, we are talking about bottarga, which is my favorite thing in the world. And let me tell you how much I love bottarga, because I think if I read this to you, you'll understand how much I love bottarga. This is the introduction to the chapter, and it says, my mother held my hand as we walked through the stifling and pungent back shop of her favorite fishmonger in Orbetello on the southern Tuscan coast. It was my 7th late September, and the air and sun tasted especially sweet when we walked out and into a courtyard. The breeze from the lagoon we were overlooking brought a flutter to the broken heart-shaped flaps hanging inside a wire mesh cabinet. Those broken hearts are why we are here, and I can't pry my eyes off their color, like that of a rusty sunset. I see my mother's hand sliding over them until she settles on the one she deems worthy, mostly a matter of size, given that the family table always has space for one more. Questa è la bottarga, amore. This is bottarga, my love, she says to me, and then asks the fishmonger to explain how it's made. We shaved it over buttered toast with lemon as soon as we got home, and later grated it into freckles of spaghetti with olive oil and parsley. It was unlike anything I had tried before. It tasted like the sea, like salt and wind, like the inside of shells, like I imagined Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid to taste if I could eat that till. 50 years later, bottarga is a fixture of my pantry, and I'm still swept away to that moment every time I eat it. So what is bottarga and how is it made? Bottarga is the raw sack of a fish, particularly a mullet or a tuna if you're in Sicily, but mostly a mullet if you're in Sardinia or on the coast of Tuscany, which is harvested and then put in either a dry salt cure or a brine, a saline solution. Once it's filled with salt and has been kind of like dehydrated a little bit via salt, then it's pressed, and finally it's hung to cure. The reason why I call it an upside down heart is because it really does look at an upside down heart. It's kind of like 2 lobes put together that look like that. Because it's sung from the bottom, I call it an upside down heart. The membranes have a little bit of a division in the middle, so it looks like it's got a broken heart in the middle. And that's what male bottarga looks like. The raw sack of the tuna is just one big sack, which is, once it's been salted and pressed, will be rectangular in shape. But it's one long sack, which is a little tapered at one hand and a little bigger at the other. The difference in flavor is profound. The tuna is a lot fishier, a lot brinier, whereas bottarga from mullet has kind of like almost this citrusy flavor to it. I call it's one of those foods that I call the nuclear holocaust food, because you can have it forever. I've had some bottarga in my fridge for 5 years, and it's still great and delicious. It changes a little bit. It's more soft at the beginning, and then it gets really hard up to the point where you can grate it. It is wonderful over bread and butter, of course. You can make pasta with it. It's great with fresh cheese, with many different types of vegetables. There's even a recipe in the book to cook it with artichoke and pork tenderloin. I also have this is the pork tenderloin right here. This is a recipe that I created for a trade fair where I was representing Italy. You can have it. I put it on soups, especially with root vegetables. This is a celery root soup that has bottarga and a little bit of chervil in it. So it is very, very versatile, and you really don't need a whole lot of it to get the wonderful flavor out of it. I think I'm done with the ingredients. So now it's time for questions.
I'll start off with the first live question, and then we'll go to chat. This is Scott. My understanding is, and see if you agree with this, that the outstanding cookbook author, Marcella Hazan, was the one who really introduced Parmigiano Reggiano to the United States, balsamic vinegar, pasta salad, and really brought in the ingredients. We had her speak for our group years ago too. We were fortunate to have her do that. But is that true? That she really spearheaded the stuff?
Well, yes and no. It is true, meaning that Marcella made it accessible and talked about it and made it more available to everyone. It had been there before. I mean, Parmigiano Reggiano was already imported back, I think, probably like already in the 1800s, but it was very relegated to the Italian communities, right? And then what Marcella did is she took Italian cooking, the contemporary Italian cooking, out of the shell where it was closed in, which was Italy, and kind of presented it to the States, presented it in a way that was not only delicious, but also feasible. And of course, she had to tell them where to find these ingredients. So she started telling them, these are the ingredients you need to look for. So she created a bigger market for it that went outside the confine of your local Italian deli. And by the way, local Italian delis are a fantastic source. So if you have one, please patronize them because they're great, right? I mean, Italy is wonderful, but also your Italian grocery is great. I was just in Boston for some book presentation a couple of weeks ago, and the North End there is a couple of delis which are fantastic. You know, they really had everything you need for an Italian pantry. So don't stop patronizing them.
And one final question from me. I was taking a cooking class once and they were using balsamic vinegar, and the teacher said, one thing about balsamic vinegar, I think this parallels what you said. He said, don't buy the cheap, buy the expensive, and you don't need to use as much too. So you're better off spending more and using less of the expensive.
Yeah, you really are.
Yeah,
so the one that is super expensive, you really use very little. I always have it in my pantry, but I really don't buy more than like once or twice a year. So while it is expensive, really, if I spread it out in all the months that I use it, it's not that expensive. The other one, you know, the one that is not traditional, but still comes from the right place, it is a mix of the concentrated grape must with red wine vinegar. And so the percentages are very varied. So there's a minimum percentage of each. And then, of course, the producers that do a better job are the ones that put more, the ones that put more of the concentrated, of the reduced wine must and less of the red wine vinegar, which means you're going to get a more expensive product. So if you get a aceto balsamico di Modena, which is also called, it also has the brand EGP, which means it's an indication of a geographical protected indication. If you buy something that, you know, it's probably maybe about like in the $15 to $20, $30 range, that's probably going to be a pretty good product. If you buy something that's below $10, it's probably not very good. Yeah. I mean, you still can buy if you want. You just need to be aware of the fact that it's not that great.
And Kathy, you want to take it away?
Yes.
With
just to continue with the balsamic, when should we use the good expensive brand? I mean, the expensive kind in general.
For the people you love. So, no, I'm kidding. You can use it for other people too. You can use it. So you can use it for. One of the best ways to use it actually is with Parmigiano. Very typical to have like little pieces of Parmigiano in a bottle of the good balsamic, the round bottles that I showed you, and you just put like a drop or two over the balsamic, over the Parmigiano. You can drip it over just very simple steamed vegetables and with a great olive oil and some drips of balsamic. It's good over a soup, like a plain soup. I also love it you can have it over, like, you know, if you're having something rich, like maybe a pate or something, a couple of the drops of balsamic are going to cut through that richness Some people make ice cream with it. You actually make like a base of cream, a custard. Yes, vanilla ice cream, Jeffrey, thank you. You made like a vanilla ice cream that has some balsamic in it, and then you churn it into ice cream. Over ice cream is great. Over fruit is great. I don't know if you like roasted fruit or warm fruit. I really do. Especially if the fruit is like, maybe like not at its most ripe. You warm it up a little bit and you concentrate the sugars, and then you put a little bit of balsamic on it. It's great with strawberries, great as a cocktail mixer. What else do I do with balsamic? You can also use it, if you like make a sauce and something is off, put a couple of drops of balsamic in it and just stir it in. It's going to fix everything. It's really kind of like it's like a medicine in cooking. It's great.
Okay, so this is going down to the tomatoes. Does your comment about looking for the seal of approval and the number also apply to other products? Oh, okay, balsamic vinegar, for example, good canned tomatoes, like from the area around Mount Vesuvius? He's wondering if there's a standard related similar.
Yes, so you're asking for the brands, right? Am I?
I think they're looking for what's the approved brands for tomatoes.
The type of tomatoes. So let me take that from the top. So there are some brands that actually come from the European Union, and you see them very often. Italy and France Italy in particular, they have the highest numbers of these products that are branded by the European Union. But there are some all over the world. Even the States has a couple, and then they're like in Africa, Japan, everywhere. So it's a sun, kind of like something that looks like a red and yellow sun. And it will say DOP, which stands for Denominazione di Origine Protetta. In English is Protected Denomination of Origin. And that is a stricted seal, and it tells you that origin and method are both incredibly important in the making of this product. So I talked about balsamic, but the tomatoes that you were asking about, there are a few types. One of them, the most famous, is a type of San Marzano being the plum tomatoes, that come from an area called Agro Sarnese Nocerino. So this particular tomato have this red and gold brand that I'm talking about. And this red and gold brand tells you that they have been cultivated in that area only, and also packed in that area only by a limited number of producers that were able to obtain this seal because of the quality of their work. So those are the tomatoes. You're talking about the Vesuvius tomatoes. What you're talking about, which I actually kind of love, they are called pomodorini del piennolo del Vesuvio. And I think I have a picture of them on my phone. So I'm going to find them. Piennolo means a pendulum, and so these are little tomatoes that about this big, and they're kind of roundish, little, like kind of a fat oval, and they have a little nipple at the bottom. And they are considered, they get their amazing flavor by the fact that they are exposed to the breezes that come from the sea onto the Vesuvius, the sides of the Vesuvius mountain. And they then I'm not looking at you because I'm looking for the pictures of them. They are clustered in like grapes, and they're hung to dry in kind of in places. Here they are. I found them. Let's see if I can show this to you. They look like that. Yeah. Wow. So this is done in Italy. They're called winter tomatoes because they last well into the winter. They have very thick skin. They are kept, away from molds and from insects, and then they get jammier and jammier, and people just keep like eating them throughout the winter. You cannot find the fresh ones in the States, but you can find them packed in water. The place that I like to get them from, and I will give you that name. is a website which is based in the Bronx, but they ship everywhere. They're called gustiamo.com. They have the best Italy has to offer. And I will also give you this little code so that you can get 10% off from your orders. So I should warn you that, these are not inexpensive ingredients, but they are incredible. There are some very good Italian ingredients that are more moderate in price, and they're very good. But anything you get from Gustiamo is going to be amazing. Someone wants to see Bottarga. Let me find a picture of that. It's the fish. Bottarga is the last chapter, but that's because it's the one that I love the most. Here it is. So here is Bottarga. Here you see that in the middle? So this is the full Bottarga right here. You see how it looks kind of like an elongated, funny looking heart? This is just one lobe of Bottarga, and this is the tuna Bottarga. So this is mullet and tuna.
So we have a question now about rice.
Yeah.
Cara said, I'm familiar with forbidden rice, which is the Asian rice. Is that in the same category of the Italian black rices?
Yeah, so the Asian rice, the forbidden rice is a japonica, which is the shorter one. And so in Italy, we have different kinds of black rice. One of them is called riso Venere. Venere means Venus, and that is related to the forbidden rice. I cannot tell you honestly how it came to Italy. That particular the particular one, rice did come to Italy via the Arab world. But it's been in Italy for a long time, like for like, I think, millennia. The black rice, so we have black rice, we have red rice, and, I'm not sure that I could tell you knowingly and with credibility that they are the product of something recent or they've been there for a while, but I can find out for you.
Okay, and then she also asked, are all black rices typically considered wild rices, which almost asks us to go back to your lecture from your friend earlier this summer.
Yeah, so yes, from Valentina. So wild rice is technically not a rice, actually. It is more of I think Valentina told us, you remember, Kathy? She said it's more of like a weed that is wild. We call it a wild rice because it looks like a rice, it cooks similarly to a rice, but it's technically not a rice. So whereas black rice is rice that is cultivable. You can't really cultivate wild rice as far as I know. It just kind of like grows. It's a weed. I think in Italian we call it zizzania, and zizzania is also something that it's a word for it's a unpleasant word. When you put zizzania something, it means that you are trying to create bad will, that you're trying to create strife. And I guess, so it's a weed, essentially.
Somebody asked if this rich information that you provided in this talk tonight is also in your book.
Yes,
actually, yes.
It is. It's even richer because it's got a lot of musings on my family and my life, which I think you might find, if not particularly interesting, at least kind of amusing.
That wedding story was great.
Thank you.
Okay, about ricotta. I have found ricotta to be grainy and difficult to like. Do you think I am not getting good quality products? I have read that you can blend it to make it smoother. And thank you for this intensely informative talk. I can't wait to get my hands on your book.
Thank you. So let's talk about that. I have a story about that. So I had a boyfriend many years ago, and we, every time, I would say, oh, we have to get ricotta, and he never quite understood why I was so obsessed with ricotta. He would say, it's just not that good. And then I brought him to Italy, and when I brought him to Italy, he had ricotta, and all of a sudden he kind of got it. So I no longer have that boyfriend, so he still loves ricotta. And yes, it is true that ricotta in the States is very often a little grainy. First of all, ricotta is one of those ingredients that it's worth spending a little bit more on. National brands that I like, domestic brands that I like are Calabro is a fairly good one. There's one called Leoni, and there's a small producer in California, in Petaluma, called Bellwether. I'll write it for you. That makes a basket ricotta, which is actually quite good. So it's spelled like this. But the big production commercial ricotta, yes, they can get quite grainy, sometimes honestly almost chalky. There are two ways that you can take away the graininess. One, yes, it's a handheld blender. The other one is pushing it through a sieve. You just take a silicone spatula and just press it down. And then you can whisk it a little bit. If it still doesn't work, take a little bit of heavy cream, whip it lightly, and then mix it in. But then it's no longer ricotta, it's something else, but at least you get the mouthfeel that you're looking for. And then you should go to Italy and try ricotta there, so you understand.
You ever make ricotta for yourself at home?
I don't, because I like to support people who devote their lives to making good food for us. To me, that is important, that support. So I don't make ricotta. I hardly ever make bread. I did during the pandemic for a bit because, I had kind of exhausted the things that kept me interested. So I turned to bread. And but I generally, no, not so much. I really like, there's always, I can make it at home, but there's always going to be someone who makes it better than I do. So I'd rather support their work rather than, and spend my time to something else.
Good answer. I would buy ricotta and it would get kind of spoiled waiting for me to get around to it. And that's when I started making it, was just to, basically have what I needed when I wanted.
Yes. Yeah. That I get. Yeah.
Yeah. On those canned sardines, the anchovies that you showed toward
anchovies, the end, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are those available to buy here? Because I know there's now a big interest in canned.
Yeah, those are easy to find. Any Italian deli that you go to, you ask for anchovies in salt. Sometimes they have like the huge cans that they keep at the counter, and they will sell them to you by weight. Or you can get like a can.
But you had that plate of, I thought it was anchovies, or maybe it was sardines.
Anchovies, it was anchovies, yeah. Those anchovies are anchovies that were in salt. And I cleaned the salt off, opened them, took the spine out, and then marinated it with lemon, olive oil, red onion, and chili flakes, and a little mint. And those are incredible. I love them. They're, I made those. I made those for something a couple of weeks ago for a book event, and I made a lot. I'm like, people are gonna say, no, not anchovies. I put them down. It took 5 minutes, and there were no anchovies. Like, they were gone. Because once people try them, they try like good anchovies. They're like, oh my God, these are incredible. Plus, they're very good for you, right? They've got a lot of like good fish oils, tons of calcium. So be them fresh or conserved, anchovies are really quite good for you.
So I remember when we started earlier this evening, your friends were making the ricotta dessert. Did you still want to show that?
Paola, me lo dai una delle cosine di ricotta che lo vogliono vedere? Il cosino con la ricotta. I have an event tomorrow, and I'm in Seattle, and I have some amazing Italian friends here, and they've been incredibly generous to me, and they're helping me cook for tomorrow's event while I talk to you. So that's Michela, and if you're ever in Seattle, Michela is the best pasta restaurant in the States. It's called Pasta Casalinga. So if you're ever in Seattle, you need to definitely try her pasta. And these are the little ricotta things. Grazie, cara. So these are made, so the ricotta is mixed with honey, and it's at the bottom. And then there is some peaches that have spent a little bit, they took a little nap in Vinsanto, and on top some amaretti. And the ricotta is, I whisk the ricotta with a little bit of honey. So the sweetness for this dessert comes mostly from the cookies and a little bit from the peaches. Peaches are at the tail end, even here on the West Coast, but you can use other fruit, of course. You could use pears, you know, you could even use like a sweet orange, so you can play with it.
This has been excellent, and I'm going to turn it over to Scott, who wants to say good night and thank you. This was really fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, we met at Pittsburgh, what was it, 2 years ago at the International Association of Culinary
three
Professionals
maybe,
Conference.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and at that wonderful food writers conference that was held in Pittsburgh, and we had dinner at the same table, and also at that table was the speaker from Ukraine who we had a few weeks ago, Anna Volishina.
Anna, yes, she
Yes.
just got back from Ukraine.
Oh boy.
You know that? Yeah. She brought an ambulance over and she fed a bunch of people. She met some chefs who are still working and doing their work despite the very harsh conditions. Yeah, she just got back like last week. Yeah.
She was amazing.
Yeah.
And I know you both have the same book publisher. And I shouldn't say this to everybody, but I'm hoping to get another one who's published a book with the same company you have, Rizzoli, is the Max Tucci, who basically is from the family that used to own Delmonico's in New York, and they've reopened. And anyway, a little alert here. So keep your eye posted, everybody, because we may have about Delmonico's restaurant and its contribution to America's culinary history. So, but, and after we get off this call, I am going to go right to the Italy website and try to sign up for your class on October 11th.
Yes.
So we'll hopefully
I was trying to, I was trying to find out if it's in there. Yeah, I'm sure it's there. They told me that they put it on, so I'm going to choose to believe them. But let me know, Scott, if you don't find it, just send me an email and I will find it for you.
Thank you. And
Okay.
ciao. And until next week, see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thanks. Bye.